Welcome back to Shoot Punch Kick, your budget-friendly time machine back into the world of 80s and 90s action and genre cinema. I'm Telly, and I'm here with my co-conspirators, Carlos and Dash. How you guys doing today?
What up, Telly? I'm excited.
Love
Yeah.
good. Having a better day than our titular character of today's podcast.
Yeah, well, that's okay. We'll get into that in a bit. But today we're doing a bona fide classic, and we're doing the first Rambo movie, which people forget the name of it because it wasn't Rambo. It was called First Blood. And we're going all the way back to 1982 to revisit this Sylvester Stallone classic. So, gentlemen, your histories with the film and just the overall Rambo franchise.
So Rambo, I remember first off very specifically because it was the first Laserdisc that my uncle ever got, and so I have a very vivid. He bought the player along with that film, and so it was kind of like, even though it was his stuff, it was Christmas for like me and him at the house because we got the new toy, and I at the time had already seen Rambo 2 and loved it. I was a kid, though. I don't know, maybe 9 years old, 10 years old. So I was already a huge Stallone fan, and I had seen subsequent Rambos, so I was really excited. But I think at the time, maybe I hadn't seen part one. And, of course, part one is a very different tone to the other two. So I remember actually seeing it and not liking it as a kid because it kind of scared me a little bit, to the extent that my uncle used to use it as the first one. Yeah, something about I think it was the woods, right? Mind you, I'm like 8 or 9, right? So something about the scenes in the woods kind of really spooked me out, and it wasn't what I was expecting because I'm sure in my head I was expecting Rambo 2 or 3, right? So it scared me to the extent that my uncle used to use it as a disciplinary measure, threatened to, if you keep acting up, I'm gonna put Rambo on. And it wasn't until I got to college and I took a film class, and we actually watched Rambo 1 and discussed it, that all of a sudden, boom, like I absolutely loved it, to the extent that it even switched my liking. Now, all of a sudden, it was like I loved Rambo 2 and 3, but I really didn't like Rambo 1. I didn't consider it part of the franchise, and it switched to Rambo 1 being my favorite and the other two kind of being anomalies. I have the Blu-rays, and I still love it to this day very much. I haven't seen it in about a decade, so this is a great chance to watch it again. And though it's not like it's seeing it for the first time, it definitely did feel like I haven't seen this in a really long time.
Yeah, by the time I saw Rambo, I already got the full legend of Rambo. By that point, it already had an animated series. I think I was mostly probably introduced to Rambo from Hot Shots Part 2, which the first one was, a spoof of Top Gun. And so this one, it was, by the time I saw it, there were already so many other movies ripping off Rambo. It had the cartoon, it had a parody. And when I saw it, it didn't really stick with me because I had seen so many other Sylvester Stallone movies. To me, he was Rocky. And even I loved Demolition Man, which was, that was like not a franchise, but that was like the first time. When Demolition Man came out, I was probably 9. So that was like one of my first in-theater Sylvester Stallone movies. So I was like, oh, it's a dude from Demolition Man. So Rambo really never stood out to me. Until later when I did watch First Blood and I started to see some of the commentary behind the movie and, the fact that it's not just a shoot 'em up movie the way the sequels were. But I had seen it, but it was never really big on my list of favorite action movies.
Anthony, even though you hadn't seen the first one, though, just as a social icon, though Rambo was awesome, even if you didn't necessarily love the movies, right? Like everybody knew who Rambo was, and if you said, "Oh, were you trying to be Rambo?" Like everyone got that. Was that the same for you? Did you at least respect him as an icon, or not really?
No, I didn't respect it. I got the character the way, the way someone would consider Jason the slasher, right? Rambo seemed like the action star, but just from my taste as a kid, I liked a lot of the sci-fi action as opposed to just dude in the woods action, because with these movies, and I'm finding them a lot now, like when I'm thinking about what I liked as a kid to now, a lot of these movies like this, McBain, the movies that have the political backdrop of the movie, they just didn't jump out to me at 10. So I understood Rambo as like a super killer with the rocket launcher and the imagery with the, you know, the red bandana. So I did put respect on his name, but he was never like my favorite star.
Yeah, I saw First Blood, like when I was 10 on TV, and I don't remember much of it other than Sylvester Stallone running through the woods, and I wasn't a big Rambo guy. I wasn't a big Stallone guy either, but obviously, yeah, Rambo was a big pop culture icon. I did watch the cartoon, ironically, and I did buy some of the toys because the toys were really cool because they were like Barbie doll-sized GI Joes, essentially, with lots of weapons. They came with lots of weapons. But yeah, in recent years, there's a movie that I've been rewatching, an old Charles Bronson movie called Chato's Land, which is basically about an Indian that gets wrongly accused, and then he runs into the desert, and he's pursued by this posse. And a lot of people are saying, "Oh, this is like a prototypical Rambo movie." So it just made me want to go back and revisit the franchise, and I'm glad I did. So let's get into the movie. So first, we start with a plot synopsis from our good friends at ChatGPT. So listen for accuracy. Here we go. First Blood, directed by Ted Kotcheff, is a 1982 action film that marks the first installment in the Rambo franchise. The film stars Sylvester Stallone as John Rambo, a Vietnam War veteran struggling to adjust to civilian life. The story begins with Rambo arriving in a small town in Washington state, searching for a friend from his unit. When he learns that his friend has passed away, Rambo becomes despondent and continues to wander. He encounters Sheriff Will Teasel, played by Brian Dennehy, who perceives Rambo as a drifter and escorts him out of town. When Rambo returns, Teasel arrests him for vagrancy. At the police station, Rambo experiences flashbacks to his time as a POW and is triggered by the abusive treatment from the deputies. He violently escapes custody and flees into the surrounding forest. The authorities, underestimating his combat skills, launch a manhunt. Rambo uses guerrilla tactics to incapacitate the deputies, turning the situation into a one-man war. As the pursuit intensifies, Rambo's former commander, Colonel Sam Troutman, played by Richard Crenna, arrives and tries to defuse the situation. Troutman warns Teasel that Rambo is a highly trained soldier capable of extreme measures. Despite Troutman's efforts, Rambo wages a destructive battle against the town, culminating in a final confrontation with Teasel. Pretty accurate?
Yeah, I saw no faults. Actually, I couldn't think of a single thing that was incorrect in this one.
So I have a beef with this, and I think it's the overall. So with the movie, I have a beef with a veteran struggling to adjust to civilian life. That's kind of not what this movie is. Like, he says that at the end, but I was always surprised. Like, really just on this watch through by how much of that isn't played up in the movie. He's straight up harassed by this cop, and he does say like, "Hey, look, I'm struggling" and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But overall, in the movie itself, there's not much. We don't see him really struggling to.
Yeah, he talks about it at the end when he's saying he can't hold down a job and all that kind of stuff. But a lot of us can relate. So initial reactions, just watching it again, guys. Start Carlos. Just
I think I played my hand at the very beginning of this. Seeing this was something that I knew I was going to love. I owned it for a while, but what I will say is. Watching it that time when I was in school, in college, on the film class, that was a revelatory moment for me because I remember going in kind of, again, just expecting this to be just like the other Rambos, just a kill fest with no real, kind of thought behind it, character development, anything like that. And when you wind up watching it, again, with adult eyes and seeing how different it was, it really blew me away. And I think some of that's diminished upon this second watch, but still solid filmmaking, much different than most people think of. I think when they think of Rambo.
Okay. Dash, initial reaction?
I had a little bit of the opposite of that because going back to it, and I have seen these back in the day, but the narrative that comes out of it, you know, is that First Blood is not the shoot 'em up as the others. This is like a very socially conscious movie that has a lot of political undertones and a message. And watching it, I was surprised by the legacy of the movie because while some of those messages are there, the especially the villains, like they're very one note, right? Like everyone is just kind of after Rambo. The nuance of like the political how like veterans are treated is it's not nuanced. It's almost like cartoony painted in like how overtly evil this like police force is. And I was also surprised because I remember the monologue, and you know what this movie reminds me of Dead Presidents.
Turn it off.
Like when you Dead Presidents is like this guy, he comes back and it's like, you know, he has a job at the butcher's and like, you know, they're all struggling. His girl moves on. And I remember like thinking about that monologue at the end and just kind of attributing that to this movie. And when I watched it, I was like, none of that was in it, you know, like, which is a testament to how great of a monologue that was. But when I went back to watch it, I think I had my hopes built up and my expectations built up into this being hey, this isn't just a shoot 'em, and it's not purely a shoot 'em up action movie, but the way like people were kind of talking about it was like, you know, this is like a film, you know, like a real film with substance. And I didn't think it had that. So I did go in with much higher expectations that I didn't think that the movie lived up to.
Yeah, so I guess I split the difference between the both of you. I didn't go into this with high expectations, but I understand the legend of the first movie being like the most serious one and the best rated one. So I was pleasantly surprised by the movie that it did find that balance between just being like escapism, and also it did have a message that it expressed without kind of beating you over the head with it, like McBain, for example, right? It didn't eclipse the story and didn't get in the way of what was the action. Although it gets ridiculous at the end, we'll talk about that later. But let's start digging into this movie a little bit. So for me, what really stood out, because I'm not a big Stallone fan, as I mentioned, and I was really taken aback by his performance. Especially like the first scene of the movie where you see like, you know, John Rambo being vulnerable, kind of shy and awkward. And that's something you don't see a lot in from a Stallone film, especially in the 80s, where he's just like this kind of dead-eyed, silent, like killer with a machine gun. But I thought it was also a little bit inconsistent in terms of his portrayal. But what do you guys think?
That was like one of the things that not shocked me, but like, you know, caught me off guard of like this real human moment with it. And it goes to show that he is like a person. He has like, so, you know, the ability to read social cues and stuff like that, which was like made me frustrated because later in the movie, when the cops are like asking him very direct questions and especially knowing what we know about the police, it was like, yo, man, are you trying to get beat up? Like, this is just kind of crazy the way that you're acting. So overall, with at least with us, Stallone's performance, it was very, very inconsistent, and especially just in terms of the things that he had to work with. He jumps out at the beginning with like a really emotional moment between a guy who, you know, is with like a grieving family, discovering that, you know, he's the last living member of his unit, then goes into kind of you know, the conversation that he has in the car is pretty like standard, but then he goes into like shut in, then war person, then monologue, then there was a lot of different beats that he had throughout where I wasn't fully sure of the character that he was trying to.
Yeah, just those
portray.
First three scenes in the movie are like almost like three different people, because there's where he's talking to the family, and then when he's talking to Brian Dennehy, and then when he suddenly just goes stone cold. Which it just didn't quite make sense to me, but I was just going with it. But Carlos, do you have any, since you listened to the commentaries, do you have any light to share? I feel like maybe that first scene was something that was just added on later. It's just, that's what it felt like.
again, so one of the things I did in research for the pod today was listen to the commentary from Stallone specifically. And it's always a little tough when you listen to these because, I don't know, actors talking about acting, it seems kind of a little bit self-important, and he did kind of wax poetic a little bit about the motivations to the extent where you kind of just turn it off because you're like, all right, whatever, man. But to the point of what you guys are describing, a couple of things. He said that the character in that first scene is overtly he's doing his best to seem non-threatening because, again, from this character's perspective, he has not been all completely successful reintegrating into society because of some of his more baser instincts that he learned, right? And so the reason he came off in that way was because he's basically at the end of his rope trying to reassimilate. Once he finds out that his friend had died, and that was his last person that he felt like he could connect to trying to bridge his way back into civilization, he said it's a very pivotal moment when he gives the mother the picture and then takes the phone book and throws it in the trash. Because at that moment, basically, what he's doing is throwing out his attempt at trying to kind of fit in. And at that point, he's aimless. And then to the extent of the scene where he's in the police station and, giving them a hard time, taking the fingerprint, and then the guy's yelling at him, and he's like wiping the fingerprints off or whatever. Stallone said, so a lot of that stuff was also ad-libbed, especially the fingerprint stuff. And
Yeah,
he said,
that whole thing with him refusing to give his fingerprints didn't quite make sense. And I hear what you're saying about that first scene, and just like that's how I rationalized it in my head, that whole thing, finding his friend was dead. It was kind of like the tipping point, but it just didn't kind of gel for me. But
so go ahead.
No, but I just thought, but overall, I thought his performance was interesting because I usually don't see that side of Stallone in at least the movies that I've watched, like Demolition Man and Cobra and things like that, where he's extremely stoic and very one note throughout the movie.
Well, so again, to that, what he mentioned in that scene also was that two things were going on. He was now actively being defiant because he was kind of sick of the character. Rambo was actively being defiant because to some degree he was looking for a fight. What's a soldier without a war to fight? And so he was to some degree kind of relishing having something to push back on, which is why he was purposely being like difficult. And then when they start washing him, that purpose defiance turns into now he's back in the jungle. So he was saying that, like, if you get captured and you're a POW, and they ask you your name, what do? You just give your name and the service number, and you don't give them any, like, even an inch, right? Because now you're kind of a POW. And so this was like his version of doing that. And so
I could see that now. They were drawing a parallel between him being a POW and him being arrested, which I didn't quite get because it's very different.
Which is why the flashback happened when it did, right? Because now all of a sudden he's captured. He's captured by the enemy. And then just lastly, what I'll say is, so I don't know if all of the things he's trying to do is effective, because you're right. I did find the portrayal to be a little bit unbalanced. At least I got some of the explanations. But to your point about him not having a lot of lines, I don't know if this is BS or not, but basically his explanation for that was also, I guess we'll talk about it later, this represented the first time in terms of distribution for films overseas. Carlco, for the first time, kind of didn't take money from the studio. They kind of self-paid for this on a loan, and then they were going to get money on the back end. And apparently during the script writing process, they were very aware of how nuance gets lost in translations. They're really thinking about selling overseas. And so they kind of felt like they really are trying to tell this story and make him sympathetic, far more sympathetic than the character is in the book. Then they need to tell he needs to tell his story with as few words as possible to give foreign film watchers as little chance to misunderstand where he's coming from as possible. Whether or not that was effective.
Seems so weird though, because even in that beginning, he has like two kind of competing motivations. So it's like part of it is like he's I guess supposed to be a sympathetic character, because he's pushing back and being non-compliant with these police, which kind of, I don't know, makes it seem like, he wanted that response that he got. But then also there's the thing where he, is getting arrested and compares it to the Vietnam, which I think either one of those would have been fine. The two of
both
them
of them.
together is where it gets kind of weird for me, because they're kind of, not that they're competing views, but that's what made it like not fully clear.
Yeah. We'll get into more of his motivations when we talk about the script, but wanted to shout out just the other actors, Richard Crenna, Brian Dennehy. There's also a young David Caruso in the movie, which is like
pre-NYPD
undeniable.
Blue.
Yeah.
I knew there
and
was
then
something
also
weird
Chris
about that guy.
Mulkey, which I know I've seen the name and I've seen him in a million things, but I can't name like more than two things he's been in.
Who is he?
He was one of the other cops.
Sure.
Yeah.
If he wasn't Rambo, he was a cop.
Yeah,
There was literally no one else in this movie.
But I really like Brian Dennehy's performance. I've always been a big fan of his because he comes off as, you're not quite. And I think he was meant to be more unlikable, but he came off as somewhat relatable in the beginning, and he didn't get quite to that kind of villain territory. And with Richard Crenna, I thought when he first came on, his first scene when he comes on, I thought he was like, it sounded very artificial. It sounded like he was doing a radio commercial from the 50s. And then I looked up his biography and I realized he started out in radio back in the old days. So very old school type of performance. But for me, I think beyond Stallone, I thought the standout was Brian Dennehy. Even though he didn't quite he needed to be more of a heavy, and he didn't quite be more of a blatant villain. But what did you guys think of the other performances? Anything stand out to you?
No, I thought Brian Denny was a little too one note with it, given the amount of screen time and like responsibility that he had to drive the movie, because pretty much everything is about his response to Rambo and how he does things. Just the setup of the movie with this character, I thought was just a little too, like, he's like, hey, where can I get something to eat? He's like, in another city. Like, it was like, damn, right out the gate. Like, there wasn't any kind of like just like a plausible, it was like, it reminded me of movies that deal with like racism, where the guy is so
like
racist it kind of takes away from what the movie
You're almost
is.
not offended by the racism because it's comical.
My issue was that Brian Denny doesn't come across as that at first, so he seems kind of like relatable, and then he kind of goes in and out. It seemed like the actor was probably not wanting to go completely just like, mustache twirling villain. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I thought you needed more of a snarling kind of, but maybe that would have taken away from the realism of the movie. But Carlos, what did you think of just the rest of the cast?
All right, so two main points, and again, I'm just pulling both of these from the audio commentary and the special features. For Dennehy's character, one thing that was not mentioned in the movie, because it was cut out to make the film shorter, is a little bit of backstory, is that Dennehy is also a veteran, a combat veteran himself of the Korean War. And again, apparently there was some kind of feelings between veterans from the Korean War and the Vietnam War, because I guess the Korean War guys feel like the war was forgotten and they never really got the credit that they deserved. And one important part is when they give you you're messing with the wrong kind of guy. Like, we looked him up. He's won the Congressional Medal of Honor. In the books, and some of the stuff cut out, you find out that Brian Dennehy also always felt like he was supposed to have won that Congressional Medal of Honor and didn't. So he's got some forward jealousy, resentment, whatever, towards Rambo, because he feels like he illegitimately got a medal for an illegitimate war. Another thing to keep in mind is that this character doesn't have a family, which is not really represented, but like, being the sheriff of this town is his total identity, because he doesn't have a family, kids, anything else. And then lastly, at least to Dennehy's point, in the book, the chapters are told one chapter's from Rambo's perspective, one chapter's from Dennehy's Troutman's perspective. Not Troutman, the cop's perspective. And in the book, the idea is you're not really supposed to know who to root for at first. And this film is changed the book, because now it's a clear decision to make this guy the bad guy. So I feel like there wasn't necessarily a whole lot of content there to pull from to make this guy be relatable, but also still be obviously the bad guy. Take from that what you will, but I thought he did good. He had moments of greatness.
Yeah.
I thought, especially in that scene with the knife to his neck, where
Mhm.
Rambo gives the famous line, "If you want a war, I'll give you a real war." Just that moment after when Rambo runs away, the fear in his face, that like a minute, oh shit, I just shit my pants. This is
Mhm.
like what just
Yeah.
happened. I thought he pulled that off really, really, really well. So that's
Yeah, one
Denny.
thing I do want to say is when I was talking about it, a lot of that was the script, right, and the character. I thought that with what he had, Brian Dennehy was awesome.
Yeah, yeah, and that actually takes us into the script. Is what I want to talk
Well,
about. So the screenplay was written by three folks, two other writers, including Sylvester Stallone, and it's based on a novel, as Carlos was alluding to, by David Morrell. And there are a lot of differences that were made between the book and the screenplay, which maybe accounts for some of Stallone's uneven kind of characterization. Because apparently, I never read the book, but apparently in the book, he's less sympathetic and he's killing the cops in the actual book. And it
he
was
kills hundreds
Stallone's
of people in the
idea.
book.
Yeah, and it was Stallone's idea to make Rambo more of a sympathetic character. And then also in the book, Troutman ends up killing Rambo at the end, and also Teasel dies from his wounds at the end of the story. So yeah, quite different. And it sounded like Stallone had a hand in this because he was coming off of the Rocky success of Rocky and Rocky 2. And this was a star-making vehicle for him. Because if you look at what's interesting about where this fits into Stallone's filmography is that he was only really known for the Rocky movies up until this point. Because the movies that he did in between the Rocky movies, like Fist, Paradise Alley, Nighthawks, Escape to Victory, weren't huge hits. And this First Blood really set him up as like the iconic action star that we knew him for throughout the 80s. But going into and what is interesting also when I was doing some research about the people behind the scenes, this is an old fashioned movie. All the people working as the writers, directors, music, these are all like veterans of Hollywood that go back into like the 50s and 60s. So this is a very old school type of movie with Stallone being the young blood in that, which is very different than what you see nowadays, right? Where like a director you've never heard of is like helming the latest Marvel movie, or some kid out of like film school is making a movie for a major studio. But these had a lot of veteran hands behind it, including the director, which was Ted Kotcheff. And it surprised me that he didn't really go on to become a major action director after this movie. And the only notable film he had in the 80s after this was really Weekend at Bernie's, which was an odd choice. But in terms of like the DP was also a longtime Walter Hill collaborator, Andrew Laszlo. So just very old school, but just want to hear your thoughts about the direction, because I think not many people ever talk about the director of this movie. They just make it seem like this is a purely Stallone film.
No, from what you say, it does feel a little old Hollywoodish. I think like very clear good guys, bad guys. Thinking about some of the later action movies in the 80s that are a little bit more nuanced with a gray character. I mean, this character in the movie, aside from what Carlos was saying about how, he kind of was pushing back against the system and there's nothing to fault for. He's not a gray character. He's very, good. He's in the right role for it. Some of the stuff felt a little hokey in terms of the direction, in terms of like how some characters are presented. I think it's what's his name? Troutman, his first line where he just like appears finishing the sentence. Yeah, it feels very like TV based. But some of the stuff in this movie, like you see this had to have been done by like straight up veterans. This movie had one of the most like impressive shots I've seen in a while, which is where Rambo's like hiding behind a tree and there's this like camera tilt and the camera tilts down and there's like a fucking helicopter that's like hovering with the camera shooting at him in the distance. It's one of the most impressive shots I've seen in a while.
Crazy.
And thinking about like just some of the longevity in terms of the action itself, the scene where he's not killing but taking out those soldiers in a straight up like, you know, something comparable to like Batman Begins or the Dark Knight movies, just really ahead of its time. Like comparing late 70s movies, early 80s action, I thought that the action was not only super competent but really stylized, showing a lot of like cohesion between different units. Like to have a timed helicopter with your camera, with your actor, was just a cinematic marvel to me. I thought it was
in a trench.
Yeah, I thought it was so dope. And then lastly, just an issue that I have with a lot of movies that take place in the woods is sometimes it can be really tough to see what's going on, especially as it gets to like nighttime scenes and just the course of time. But I thought it was just really competently done.
Yeah, there's a lot of craftsmanship in this movie, which I was really impressed by. Just the way it was shot, you see everything that's going on without being sort of overly flashy, which you'll see later in the 80s, you know, when you have like music video people and commercial directors kind of coming in and helming these films. But Carlos, just your thoughts on the overall direction and action and just how the film was presented.
Yeah, so a couple of things from my notes. To your point with Troutman coming in and seeming like a little bit canned when he came in, especially with that line. One thing to keep in mind with that specifically was that Kirk Douglas was supposed to do this role. He got fitted, costumed, everything. They agreed on the script. And apparently he shows up to set on day one with the new script. He basically had taken the script and completely rewrote it. And in his version, there's a wrestling scene. Like it turns out Troutman's the real Rambo, and he sees Rambo and immediately puts him in a figure four leg lock and makes him tap out. And in his version of the script, at the end, Rambo makes it out of the police station, like sneaks off, and then you see Rambo like getting away, and you think he's gonna get away, and then apparently you look back and there's Troutman on another motorcycle, and then next shot Rambo's tied to a radiator. You don't even know how he did it. Right, like
see, that's the reason why Sean Connery was able to have a career in the 80s, because he was willing to take a back seat and become like a mentor character and not be the star. But that also propelled him back into the spotlight. And a lot of old school actors like Kirk Douglas, they weren't ready to give up that fight.
Weren't ready to do that. So the reason that I say that because Crenna came in literally the next day. He was told one day he got the role and was on set the very next day. To the extent that the reason he's in the trench coat and everything is that they couldn't even costume him. So he, Kirk Douglas is like 5'8", 5'9", and Crenna is like 6'2". So the costume didn't fit. So like the pants were too small, the arms didn't work right, and so just to his credit, he was doing Broadway. He was playing a gay doctor in a Broadway show, and then next day you're playing badass soldier who's been through like so much or whatever. So I give him a little bit of a pass considering that. And there are some interesting things he does later on that we may talk about considering the ending, that I give him a little bit of a pass on. To your point about this feeling old school in the directing, I will say I actually conversely got a different feeling oppositely. And I kind of looked it up. I did a little digging. And the reason for it is usually with action movies prior to this movie in the 3-act setup, they typically will have one action set piece in every one of the acts. But this is one of the first movies where after a little bit of an intro, the majority of the entire movie is basically one long action sequence. Right? There's a couple of moments of downtime. But for the most part, and again, you might say action is him shooting down a bunch of people or getting shot by people in the forest, but him going through the caves, him trying to find his way out, all kind of makes it so that there's very little time where there's no tension in the film, right? Which is a very different kind of formatting than other things. And then just lastly, little things that I noticed that he did that I really appreciated in the directing were things like during the chase sequence, there's great music in this film And during the chase sequences, at a certain point, you'll notice he very slickly will cut out the music. So at the end, in the chase sequences, all you hear are basically what Rambo and the cop would hear. Rambo on his motorcycle, and the cop. So it gives it like a visceral feel for that. Just the timing and like ways that he took sound cues and stuff. I think it was really expertly done, if a bit understated. But yeah, I take a alternative view of it seeming not old school, but very different. And then other movies subsequently took that formula.
Yeah, no, I think in terms of the pacing, definitely not old school because it's very action packed. It's a big chase movie essentially, but just in terms of the way it's directed, just the the wide shots and everything, and just how they shot the forest.
Beautifully shot,
really
man. You're
great.
totally right.
So
Anthony.
again,
Like,
I'm just surprised that Ted Kotcheff didn't go further, and I think this also goes to the question of whether or not Stallone like ghost directed the movie, because that's what he was kind of notorious for during the 80s.
it seemed like he kind of did.
Yeah, so
like
maybe that's why that's why Ted Kotcheff's not on the Blu-ray or whatever. So so that's a question there. And then you talked about the music. You know, it was by Jerry Goldsmith, legendary composer. It did everything from Logan's Run to Chinatown, Omen, Basic Instinct, you name it. The Mummy, the one with Brendan Fraser. Although I do ding the music for the song at the end, which gave me McBain vibes.
But no, but the lyrics, like,
song.
but the melody, I think, is dope. Like,
yeah, but just like it just didn't feel, it didn't work. And then speaking of the ending, and this kind of, we could talk about more about the action here. The third act, while I appreciated it, it kind of made no sense to me, because once he escaped from the cops and he drove off in the truck, I don't know why Rambo goes around blowing up the town randomly. So that just kind of felt just bizarre to me. They made it kind of work if you assume that Rambo is like someone suffering from PTSD and a very troubled, mentally troubled character, but I don't think they spent enough time building that up that for that ending, because it's literally he escapes, but then he decides to just pull the car over, start blowing up a gas station, and just start like shooting things up. But how did you guys feel about just the ending?
You mean story-wise or action-wise?
Just story-wise first.
Okay, Dash, you want to go? So story-wise, again, this is another big controversy. Not controversy, but a major part of the filming, in that the original script and in the book, Rambo dies. After that long sequence where he's talking about, you don't just shut up. First of all, I love that speech. I just, as a kid, it was something, or as a younger person, it was something that we always used to like comment. I can't even get a job parking cars. And I think it actually makes sense for him to commit suicide at the end of this, if it's supposed to be a treatise on PTSD and the kind of way that we treat our soldiers. But apparently two things happened. A was test audiences absolutely hated the thing. And it's funny, the director, at one of the test viewings, apparently he was there, just hidden in the crowd, and somebody out loud said, "If the director's here right now, we should shoot him." And he just kind of snuck out. Audiences hated it. And Stallone was, again, directing, kind of ghost directing, said that he didn't like the message it was sending. He was really, again, it was his decision to soften up Rambo. In the books, Rambo kills like 300 people. The kid, the kid that he sees in the forest randomly, kills that kid, kills that kid's parents, just is on a rampage and is irredeemable.
Classic Rambo.
Classic. And so still, from Stallone's perspective, he was like, if we want this to be a message of hope, or a message to really speak out for these soldiers that have come back, these veterans, then I don't like the idea of, so what's the answer the movie's telling is that just fuck it, there's no way you're going to integrate in society, so you should just end it all. And so he said, no, we want to make him redeemable. And so story-wise, and also to your point about why he came back, Two things. A, he heard in the radio that all the exit points, like there was no in a vehicle getting out from that perimeter. But apparently in the books, it's kind of more symbolic because he wanted to tear down that whole city. He actually destroys a lot more of that city in the books. He tears down City Hall. He tears down the jail building, right? And it's supposed to be like symbolic of, whatever. And so that's why he does it in the
Giving it to the
in
man.
the ending. But what I will say, having said all that, I think that the last act is the weakest act of the film. I do agree with your sentiments. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Dash?
Yeah, I think it's fine, but by then I already didn't have. For me, aside from the monologue, none of the plot was really, realistic or something that I thought would end very well. I mean, even leading up, I think the part for me where I thought it was very, and this is where I use old school, in the way like anytime you have a scene where no one dies and you're doing all these like high risk traps and stuff like that. I do a little, even like if it's Batman, like, they're throwing everybody and then they're just like, oh no, he was tripped. I do a little bit of the eye roll. That happens pretty early in this movie. And as it gets to, to the end, it gets a little bit over the top and more into that cartoony aspect that I just felt was like pretty prevalent throughout the movie. Like, at no point in time was I like, wow, this is like a good character study. Very interesting to hear like Sylvester Stallone's takeaway of it, because it's like, again, it seems like a response to that monologue, but not the rest of the movie.
Everything else you saw.
Yeah. Like part of
It's
the
basically bookended because all the themes and messaging happens in like the beginning and the very end of the movie, and then the rest of the movie is just a chase film.
And the hope of integration is like we never see him really fail to do it. We just fail to see him interact once in a constructive manner with the police. So with, given like
fail to do what? What do you mean? Fail to do what? You never see him fail
to integrate into society.
Okay.
He's saying all of these things, and it's to me it just feels weird because we're talking about the movie like that's the movie.
Yeah.
The movie is him fighting these like just waves of nameless cops that all have one driving motivation going into it. There's no like nuance between the police. There's like one guy is just as evil as Teasel, right? And then he gets taken down, and then like another guy steps in and he's like, we gotta, shut him down. The movie that it feels like the reverse of Predator, where none of the cops are. So like it's like Rambo's the Predator, but Arnold Schwarzenegger's team is very diverse in opinions and characters, like, not like racially, but like each one has like a trademark, a point of view, something. And in this one, it was just Sylvester Stallone going through these just like one person just steps into the role. So by the end of the movie, I was just like, well,
that's one of those things that I wonder, because like they could have definitely had like different cops of different generations commenting on just sort of Stallone and the war. But I wonder if that would have worked for a movie like this, for the type of movie this was, because this really, again, I went into this movie expecting something a little bit more serious, and I was surprised by how even the first one, in First Blood, was still kind of silly and kind of unbelievable. So it wasn't like realistic in any sense. But that said, I thought the action was handled really well, where it was kind of like a Die Hard type of action, where it's kind of a more exaggerated reality versus something that's like totally unbelievable.
Well, it's situational.
Yeah.
So, like, it's
like
the
throwing
same.
the rock, it's
the same thing I feel about like Speed, right? Like you get a movie and you task someone with like one objective, which is, either get through this, get off the bus, get off, and you watch that unfold. It definitely gives it a realism to root itself in, of the consequences of like you going against police, what would you do, and the way things unfold. And that's what I meant. For me, the action part is the thing that I was like on board with. It was just the plot and the things that stretch these moments together where I never felt like it was doing what it intended to do, which was to portray this, PTSD soldier who's having a hard time integrating into society, as well as give me like a plausible reason why any of this is happening. Like no one was like, wait a minute, what did he do? Nothing. Like I just don't, like it was just such a leap that like I was still on board, but it didn't have that like reality to it, where even some of the stuff like felt a little flat. Like I thought some of the moments between him and his old commander could have like had a little bit more levity, more like gravity behind it, but the fact that it was on top of this kind of like exaggerated bedrock, it was like, all right.
So I think to your point, Dash, apparently this movie actually had a way longer cut. There's like a 3.5 hour cut of this movie. And apparently though it was terrible. Like everyone who saw it, at least everyone who spoke about it, and anything that I saw was like, this is one of the worst pieces of shit I've ever seen. And from my understanding, and even in some of the deleted scenes on the disc, some of that is you seeing him trying to assimilate. One of the deleted scenes is Rambo with the squad in Vietnam, so you kind of get an idea. And I'm not sure if it was the shoebox scenario he describes in his speech or what, but there's also some flashback. It's done through flashbacks, which I think already is a hokey method to do, to give out some of the information. I think that movie that you're talking about, which would have been a more effective character study and would have made him a lot more kind of believable, might actually exist. And you know what? I would be curious to see that cut, as terrible as it is. That
But
actually gives you some of the things.
But I'm saying, like, you don't even have to make that movie. Like, to me, the movie feels like the mistreatment of veterans by society. You could have just this film, which is there, and just, like, kind of change some of the things. It's just, like, people misjudge veterans. People don't help out people that are doing things, but which always felt weird to me watching this, because it's like, that is there in everything, but they kind of don't really address it. So it feels weird. And then it's like, no, the movie's about like Rambo. Like for that, you kind of need like
there's the other side of it too, is that we're catching it's not just that society is bad to veterans and all these people are treating this veteran bad, but I think one thing that they mentioned a lot in the book and stuff is that Rambo was also wrong, right? And so Rambo, they keep on going back to saying Frankenstein. Like, we built this Frankenstein's monster. And not only, it's not like Frankenstein was doing everything right to assimilate, and yet it still didn't go right for him. Frankenstein was trained, or in this case, Rambo was trained to be a killer, and it's those killer instincts that he doesn't know how to get rid of, that's causing him to do things that will make other people treat him bad.
Well, but by the time that happens, it's so far along. Like none of that happens to him by the time he does that. Like he's just a regular dude looking for something to eat. He's like brutalized. They're shaving him. They're like scrubbing him against his will. Like they're doing so much that by then it's like, oh shit. Like when they compare he's currently being treated worse than he was as a POW in Vietnam. So it's not even like, okay, he's, in the wrong to snap back. You're like, yo, he's a citizen, and you're like brutalizing it.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to why it took so long for the book to be adapted, because it could only kind of go two ways. And if you were to kind of compromise, Rambo being this PTSD, Frankenstein's monster, killing machine, because he was trained for that. And then also having that as the hero of your movie wouldn't be possible. It would have to kind of be flipped around, where it has to be told from Troutman or Teasel's perspective. And going into actually some of the background of the film, the book came out in 1972, and it was optioned pretty immediately to be turned into a movie. And you had a lot of big time, A-list directors attached to this, like Sidney Pollack, Mike Nichols, John Frankenheimer, and then a lot of A-list actors also attached to this movie, like from everyone from Robert De Niro to Clint Eastwood, Paul Newman, Steve McQueen. Burt Reynolds, Nick Nolte, John Travolta, and then also some other well-known character actors as Teasel and Troutman. And I think probably my guess is that the original intention was this was going to be a serious type of post-Vietnam War drama. And then when Stallone got involved, he kind of made it a little bit more of a popcorn sort of action movie. And that's why it just doesn't feel like it fits into either very neatly because it doesn't really do much as a drama, and it's not a full-blown balls to the wall action movie, which the sequels were. So I think that's partly why the film kind of turned out the way it did. And to Carlos's point, the first cut was 3.5 hours long, and it was cut down to 93 minutes. And apparently before it was cut down, Stallone, he hated the movie and thought it was going to destroy his career. And I guess
he tried to buy it back. I think he tried to buy it back and
So my thought is that he probably took the movie away from the director and edited it himself, and that's how we got the final version of it. And that's why the director's Ted Koch has been sort of shortchanged from this movie. But but as a whole, I was just very pleasantly surprised by just how restrained it was as an action movie and how much more deeper it was for what it was. Not that it was any kind of character. It wasn't the Deer Hunter or anything like that.
Yeah, but I mean, again, in compared to Rambo's 2 and 3, which is I think what most people think of when they think of Rambo movies, I feel like this is maybe it's one of those much more drama. It's not great, but by comparison,
Right. And speaking of comparison, let's go to reaction to this movie. So this currently has a 86% on Rotten Tomatoes, both from the tomato meter and also the audience score. So this is the highest rated Rambo movie. On IMDb, it gets a 7.7. And when it came out, our good friend Roger Ebert gave it 3 stars. He said it was a very good movie, well-paced and well-acted, not only by Stallone, but also by Crenna and Brian Dennehy. Although almost all of First Blood is implausible, because almost all of First Blood is implausible, because it's Stallone on the screen, we'll buy it. The New York Times, Janet Maslin called it fierce, agile. He calls Stallone a fierce, agile, and hollow-eyed hero who is portrayed as a tormented, misunderstood, amazingly resourceful victim of the Vietnam War rather than a sadist or a villain. And then lastly, Variety called it a mess and criticized its ending for not providing a proper resolution for the character. So I think it speaks to kind of both your criticisms about just the film not pleasing one side or the other. And then let's go to the Proletariat and see what they thought. On IMDb, the most recent 1-star review from Gene07202 says, "Such a bad film. I realize that viewers have to suspend disbelief, but this is ridiculous and stupid. Making a movie and taking a big city mentality and putting it in a small town, it defies belief. In a real small town in middle America, Rambo would have last less than 60 seconds." And then on the more positive side, we get 10 stars from TW Ridge 19
out of 5.
And he says it's great still. It's 10 out of 10 on IMDb. And he says it's a compact, excellent action movie with heart. One thing I finally noticed that you overlook in Stallone's powerful physicality of his performance. From the time he is brought into the police station, which is 10 minutes into the movie, until the last 5 minutes of the movie, Rambo only has 4 lines of dialogue.
I know.
Which is positive or negative. But this movie was a huge hit, as Carlos was alluding to. Opening weekend gross of $6.6 million, which was a lot in 1982, in October 22nd of 1982. Eventually made $51 million in the U.S., and it made $125.2 million globally on a budget of $15 million. And just for shits and giggles, I'll give you the top 5 movies that were out on the weekend that First Blood came out. So First Blood was obviously number 1. Second was Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. Number 3 was a movie called Monsignor. I think it's some priest movie. Number 4 was An Officer and a Gentleman. And number 5 was E.T. the Extraterrestrial.
Oh wow, but
which
but
was
like in its 50th week,
in its 20th week.
Yeah, there you go.
Can you imagine that these days? A movie being out for like half a year.
That's crazy.
Rocky 3 at this point at number 11 on its 22nd week.
Oh my God.
on the in theaters.
So there was a Stallone fever.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that's cool, but the really interesting thing was this was for the producers of the film, like a passion project. The movie had been passed around. Everybody thought it was unmakeable. And so this guy, I forget, Kassar, I guess, he just went up to his uncle, who was like a banker in Rome, and was like, hey, man, I can't get anybody to have any faith in this movie. So instead of going to find a studio to bankroll this, can I get a loan from you? And then I'll just worry about distribution on the back end. And apparently, this was very new to the game at the time. And so, you wind up getting lowballed if you're just pushing a script. But if you've got a 90-minute or a cut that shows all this action now, everybody's coming to you, and you get to set the terms for distribution. And I think it was the first time, too, where it wasn't a global distribution. They negotiated individual terms in each territory. And they staggered the release dates so that the success from one territory bled into the negotiations for the next one, and wound up making a killing. Apparently, Kralko kind of pioneered this idea, and a bunch of movies subsequently, passion movies, both good and bad, got made under this new model of get the funding first and then involve the studios after the movie's made.
Yeah, that's what Canon did, and that's what made them bankrupt in the 80s. But yeah, it's time to wrap this up. So Dash, favorite scene?
My favorite scene was him taking out these dudes like Batman. I thought that was really dope. And really the part that jumped out to me the most, because I picture my Rambo just minigun, hail of bullets around him, and I know he has this badass knife, but that was just such a dope sequence to highlight, and that was like really part of his like first wave of attacks, so completely set the tone of why you should be rooting for Rambo, why he's one of the best. And I thought it was just such a dope, for me, the real intro to the character, because we've seen him before up to that point. We've heard about how badass he is, but what a fucking showcase of just him being badass.
And he works fast. Those traps that he was able to carve up and set up, like like within an hour, forget about it. Give Jigsaw a run for his money. But Carl, favorite scene?
For me, the favorite scene, and again, I don't know if this is the first time it's done in the movie or not, but it's when Troutman is giving you he's been trained to ignore the conditions, kill a million people, like something about that in every single movie where, like, again, you're talking about the way to prove that someone's a badass by somebody else talking about how badass they are.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is the prototypical one of those or not, but I just find that a lot of fun. And that's kind of like a jokey answer. A more serious answer is I really like the chase scene in the very beginning when he first breaks out, when he's on the motorcycle against the police car. And a cool side note, that police car flip where Bart Dennehy has that accident, that wasn't in the script. The stuntman actually accidentally crashed that shit. And they were like, oh, well, this is perfect. Let's keep it in there.
Yeah.
It's funny.
So
We're so trained on action movies. I totally expected that the police car to explode once it rolled over. So I'm glad it didn't. So again, that's what brought it some realism. My favorite scene was actually a non-action scene. It was just Stallone sort of screaming, because again, I'm not at the very end doing his monologue because
that's the one that got me when I watched it again.
Yeah, because I thought that's what the whole movie was kind of building up to. It was very cathartic, and it also showed me a different side of Stallone, because he was always an actor first before an action star, unlike like Schwarzenegger or Jean-Claude Van Damme and those other guys. And then people kind of shortchange him for his acting chops. And one question I have for both of you guys, one thing I did not understand at all, that scene when he's hiding behind the tree and they're shooting at him from I think it was from the helicopter. No, when Brian Dennehy and the posse arrive and they're shooting at him. Do they actually hit him in the head or not? Because he doesn't seem to suffer anything later, but he does wear the thing around the head. So I don't know if that, maybe there was a scene that was cut out, but it seemed to imply that he was shot in the head, but then he just kind of runs around.
I know that he actually wound up getting hurt by a bunch of the squibs. They were really like in real life, and they added that into the film. So I know some of the injuries he took in the movie were not in the script. It was just actually real injuries, and they decided to put it in the movie. But I'm not sure about that scene specifically.
Yeah, same. I just assumed he got like grazed or something.
Okay, like someone's president.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And okay, so let's do our rating. Carlos, would you do the honors?
Yeah. So if you would have asked me when I was a kid, when I was a 9-year-old, the rating, it would probably have been a 1 or a 2. If you would have asked me when I started in college in that class, it would have been a 5. Now, with everything kind of put together, I'm going to give this movie a 4 tarps turned into T-shirts out of 5.
Okay. I'm gonna going into this. I'm kind of similar. I think like just knowing the legacy of it and hearing the like, oh, this is not your typical Rambo. I was expecting this to be like a 4.5, 5, but I'm gonna give this 3 guys like you in this town. It just didn't measure up to the long lasting. I think it's more of just Rambo as a whole, Rambo the franchise, and Rambo the sequels, and that ending monologue that really stood the test of time. It was a fine movie, but I think it gets a lot more credit than I think it deserves. And I wouldn't put this as like, Rocky is like, you think about Sylvester Stallone, you think about Rocky. I think when you think about Rambo, it's not this movie. So I'm going to give it 3.
Okay. Yeah. I'm in the middle. I give this 3.5 sackcloth jackets out of 5. So similar to Carlos. Yeah, no, I didn't go in with very high expectations because this is always like the forgotten Rambo movie because it's not even called Rambo. But I was surprised by how well it was made and also that it did have something to say without being just without beating you over the head with it. Like again, like our favorite movie, McBain. And it did, the action was really well done. I thought Stallone's performance was really good despite sort of the unevenness. But yeah, very enjoyable, and I look forward to going through the rest of the Rambo movies. And if you guys want us to go through the rest of the Rambo movies, let us know.
Yeah.
So we're at that time where we talk about what we're doing on the next episode, and I'm passing the baton over to Dash.
So, gentlemen, it is with great pleasure. I don't know if it's great pleasure. I haven't seen this in a long ass time, but as some of you may know, I am a betting man. And next week, I would like to always bet on black with Wesley Snipes.
All right.
Passenger 57, directed by Kevin Hooks. This is my choice for the next week's episode of Shoot, Punch, Kick.
Awesome. I've been meaning to watch that. I know that
Wesley
line.
Snipes didn't bet on paying taxes.
But I haven't seen the movie yet, so I'm looking forward to it.
You haven't seen it?
No, I haven't seen it.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
That's a major gap. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right.
So that's what we're doing.
So that concludes this episode of Shoot, Punch, Kick. Please subscribe, like, and comment. Let us know if you want us to. We're taking requests. We just did Tango and Cash a couple of weeks ago. Maybe a non-Stallone movie, since we've been kind of going very deep into Stallone's filmography. But let us know what you guys think. Let's have a conversation, and see you next time, guys.
But goddamn.